Welcome to Moconomy Originals, original stories of founders, brands, and global business power.
The UK has voted to leave the European Union.
On June 23, 2016, the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union. It was one of the most disruptive political moments of recent decades. And behind that decision was a specific promise: that Britain didn't need Europe, that it had something better, something bigger, something more its own. They called it the Commonwealth. 56 countries, 2.5 billion people, 1/3 of the world's population. Leave politicians presented it as a dormant commercial network ready to wake up. The natural alternative to the European single market. Proof that Britain remained, at its core, a global power. There is a problem with that story. At the time of Brexit, the Commonwealth represented 9% of the UK's foreign trade. The European Union represented 43%. It wasn't that the Commonwealth was an imperfect alternative to the EU, it's that it was never an alternative at all. So, what exactly is the Commonwealth? And how is it possible that an entire nation gambled its economic future on an organization that almost no one can define?
After Britain left the EU, you had this idea of a global Britain foreign policy. So the idea that Britain would now look beyond the small provincial Europe and look at the world, and that this fitted well with Britain's history, the history of a globalist power, the history of a free trading nation. That's interesting because by calling Britain historically a country with a globalist outlook and a free trade outlook, all of this is true, but it's obviously just half of the story, because those global connections, they arose from the empire. So the empire is always there, but it's never mentioned.
To understand the Commonwealth, you first have to understand what preceded it: the largest empire the world has ever known. At its height, the British Empire ruled over 1/4 of the Earth's land surface, 400 million people. It was said to be the empire on which the sun never set. That empire vanished, but something remained in its place, and that something, the Commonwealth, has spent 70 years generating an uncomfortable question. What is it for, and for whom? Because this is where the story gets interesting. It turns out the Commonwealth does not primarily benefit the United Kingdom. It doesn't provide military power, commercial weight, or real diplomatic influence. Paradoxically, those who benefit the most are the ones least mentioned: the 33 small member states, from Malta to Tuvalu, from Belize to the Solomon Islands, who use those summits to sit in the same room as the leaders of the world's great powers.
So I really wouldn't think of the Commonwealth as an instrument of British power at all. But I think that in certain circumstances it adds to the power of certain member countries, especially the small ones. If you are the head of government of a small country in, for example, Africa, and that country has limited trade, limited connections, then getting into a room very regularly with many world leaders, including the leaders of big countries such as the United Kingdom or Australia or New Zealand, that gives you clout, and that gives you influence, and that gives you visibility, and all that matters in international relation and in diplomacy.
And so, Brexit carries another level of irony that few have pointed out. The United Kingdom sold its people the idea that the Commonwealth would restore the global prominence that Europe had taken away. But the Commonwealth was never their tool. If anything, it was the tool of everyone else. Which brings us back to the question that opens this documentary. How is it possible that an entire country bet so heavily on something that so few understand? The answer has to do with history, identity, and nostalgia. The extraordinary human capacity to remember the past very selectively.
I think the first challenge the Commonwealth is facing in the 21st century is relevance. I don't think it will stop to exist, but there are those who say that people won't leave it because it's not important enough to leave it. The question is, how much can it still matter in a completely changed world compared to what it was at its inception. And also it's a generational change, not just in the United Kingdom, but in the member states of the Commonwealth.
To understand that question, you have to go back to the beginning. Because the Commonwealth didn't appear out of nowhere. It was built, brick by brick, on the ruins of the largest empire the world has ever seen. And to understand what it is today, you first need to understand what it was designed to replace. The First and Second World Wars severely weakened Britain's hold on its overseas territories. The empire had invested all its resources in defeating Nazi Germany, leading to a gradual loss of control over its colonies. The period following the Second World War is known to historians as decolonization.
The United Kingdom is a multiracial society. You have big communities of Indian heritage, Bangladeshi heritage, Caribbean heritage, and of course that all has to do with the history of the empire and of the Commonwealth.
The search for an appropriate name already indicates the organization's long quest for meaning. In the early 1900s, the South African statesman Jan Smuts coined the term Commonwealth to describe the community of white settler territories within the British colonial world.
The Commonwealth is an organization which evolved very gradually. So you didn't have a moment when somebody laid down a charter and created an organization and laid down the rules, and there is a pretty loose association. You didn't even have regular meetings of the membership countries for a significant period of time. You have these meetings today, but it evolved over time, and it grew over time because originally you only had, before 1949, you only had the 7 members, and the so-called white dominions, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, South Africa. That changed when more and more countries wanted independence from the British Empire.
The term referred to the territories dominated by European settlers within the British Empire, including Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. Only these countries were believed capable of forming their own democratic nations.
The Commonwealth was created in 1931 with the so-called Statute of Westminster. That was a law, and it came 5 years after the Big Imperial Conference of 1926, where the decisions underlying that law were made.
In 1926, the Balfour Declaration introduced the term British Commonwealth of Nations. Member countries, as well as the United Kingdom itself, were described as voluntary, freely associated members of a federation of democracies under the imperial umbrella. After the First World War, these countries became largely sovereign states, with only a few remnants of colonial dependence on London, mainly in foreign policy. The Statute of Westminster of 1931 gave this formal legal weight. But the Commonwealth as we know it today would only take shape almost 2 decades later, with a pivotal moment that changed everything: India's independence.
The Commonwealth as we know it today was really created later in 1949, when India, which had recently become independent, joined the Commonwealth as a republic. And at that moment, a new role was created for the British sovereign, the British king. He was now the King of England and the Commonwealth realms, such as Australia, and he was also the head of the Commonwealth. So he was the head of the larger organization.
One of these 15 Commonwealth realms, counting the United Kingdom itself, is St. Lucia. In 1966, the West German media reported on its admission to the Commonwealth.
St. Lucia, discovered by Columbus, fought over by French and English. First and last state visit by the British monarch before the island kingdom in the Caribbean Sea joins the Commonwealth as an independent group of states.
The Commonwealth, to this day, really consists of 2 different groups of countries. The so-called Commonwealth realms, countries which still have the British monarch as their head of states, and today there are 14 of them. And then the much larger group of Commonwealth countries, the vast majority of them were once British colonies or mandate territories or subjugated territories in any way, but they are now republics. And they do not recognize the British monarch as their head of state at all, but they're part of the Commonwealth, and of that Commonwealth, the British monarch is the head.
When India, Pakistan, and Ceylon joined the Commonwealth as the first non-white former colonies between 1947 and 1949, the term British was dropped. The main idea was that Britain was just one part of a larger entity, not the entire empire. Over time, of nations was also removed, and now it is simply referred to as the Commonwealth.
And you have this huge transition process of decolonization in the late 40s and throughout the 1950s and the 1960s. So you have more and more countries becoming independent and joining the Commonwealth. What's important is that a country that became independent wasn't obliged to join. It didn't have to join the Commonwealth if it didn't want to, but most did.
London. Queen Elizabeth and the Duke of Edinburgh take off from the English capital's airport on a 6-month tour. Queen Elizabeth and her husband plan to fly around the world, visiting the countries of the British Commonwealth.
Today, the official Commonwealth consists of 56 member countries. King Charles III is recognized by all as head of the Commonwealth. It spans roughly a third of the world's population, with representation on every continent and within all major religious groups. Its members range from some of the world's wealthiest nations, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Singapore, and Brunei, to some of the poorest, including Malawi, Mozambique, Sierra Leone, and Rwanda. All member states have equal formal rights and decision-making within the organization.
There are also some countries which joined which have never been part of the British Empire. There are countries which very recently joined the Commonwealth because they just wanted to be part of this international organization because they saw a benefit in this. I think one of the consequences of the creation of the Commonwealth was that I think in British public perception and the self-image that the British have of themselves, it softened the blow of decolonization because everybody still remained in the same club.
The membership list has undergone significant fluctuations over the decades. South Africa withdrew in 1961 under pressure from other members over apartheid, but was readmitted in 1994 after its abolition. Gambia left in 2013 and rejoined in 2018. Pakistan withdrew in 1972 and rejoined in 1989. Nigeria, 1995 to 1999, Sierra Leone, 1997 to 1998, and Fiji, 2000 to 2001, and 2009 to 2014, were suspended for human rights violations. In 2018, Zimbabwe applied for readmission after the ousting of longtime ruler Robert Mugabe. The application remains under review.
The human rights record of the Commonwealth isn't very good. In 2013, Sri Lanka hosted the Commonwealth Conference, and that was a time when there had just been a civil war in that country, and the government of the country was actually accused of pretty drastic human rights violations and war crimes. So the idea that the Commonwealth is a group of democracies or a group of countries which share values and value human rights, it is simply not true. I would rather say that some of the members use the Commonwealth to whitewash their own pretty poor human rights records.
Firstly, the Commonwealth does not serve as a foreign policy tool of the United Kingdom. The UK is symbolically at the helm, with its monarch recognized as head of the Commonwealth, but that does not translate into political control.
The monarchy was supposed to be very visible in the colonies. Now there aren't any colonies anymore, but this idea of the crown keeping the Commonwealth together existed during Queen Elizabeth's reign.
Secondly, the Commonwealth is not a military alliance like NATO and does not provide collective security. Unlike the former British Empire, it is not held together by troop deployments, and there are no common military structures. Britain does not wield military power on behalf of the Commonwealth, and few member countries rely on the United Kingdom for their security. Countries like Canada and Australia have relied on the United States for decades.
It would be a big mistake to assume that the Commonwealth acted as one or shared one opinion at moments of international political crises. The Suez Crisis was a big turning point in the history of the British Empire, and it was a disaster of British foreign policy in 1956. And at the time, it was important to the British government, which was under a lot of pressure, to gain the support of the Commonwealth members. But it didn't get it from all. They got a lot of support from Australia and from New Zealand, but countries such as India stayed completely out of it and didn't share the British point of view on the crisis.
Thirdly, the Commonwealth is not a supranational union of states like the European Union.
I don't think that the Commonwealth really adds much to Britain's power in the world. It does give it a certain soft power in the sense that Britain to this day has a vast network of embassies all around the world, and they have a tradition of connections and just a worldview that looks at every bit of the globe. But to think of the Commonwealth as an organization which is led by the British and which is really sort of an alternative to the EU, where Britain can wield power, that is completely unrealistic.
In the Commonwealth, there is no executive body like the EU Commission, no common parliament, and no independent judicial system. Member states do not delegate sovereignty to the Commonwealth. Although many members share a common law tradition, there is no binding, overarching legal framework.
Being in the Commonwealth is not that big of a commitment, and it doesn't preclude you to have close connections with anybody else. For example, there is no longer such a thing as a Commonwealth citizenship. You can't just decide, I live in India and I want to move to Australia and we're both in the Commonwealth, so I can just go. That's not how it works.
Fourthly, the Commonwealth is not a closed economic area, nor an alternative to the world market. It does not constitute its own customs union or free trade zone.
The Commonwealth today is not hugely important when it comes to trade or economic links. It's mainly a soft power organization. What it gives the member countries is visibility and an opportunity to get into a room with other leaders from around the world, and especially with some very big players in international diplomacy, such as, of course, the United Kingdom, but also such as Canada or Australia. And I think this is one of the reasons why so many countries have decided to stay in the Commonwealth, because it does give them diplomatic opportunities and the opportunity to regularly meet with big players in the international.
Fifthly, the Commonwealth is not a substitute empire. The most significant difference from an empire is that membership is entirely voluntary. No country is compelled to join or remain.
There are those who look at the British Crown and see it as a symbol of oppression or a symbol of colonialism. That's a little simple because the British monarchy hasn't had political power in a very long time. But still, in the end of the day, the role in Britain, but also in the Commonwealth, of the British monarchy is to symbolize the country. And if you're looking at Britain from the perspective of a country which has been really subject to brutal colonial rule and which has also been a hub of slavery or the slave trade, then you might just want to cut those ties.
A country can leave the Commonwealth at any time. Ireland did so in 1949. The door, however, swings both ways, and most former colonies have chosen to stay.
The first big and really relevant turning point was 1949, when India became a member as a republic.
In 1950, when India became a self-governing republic, the Indian people preferred not to recognize the British Crown as their symbol of Commonwealth membership.
And as a consequence, the British monarch got a new role because he couldn't be head of state of India, but he could be head of the Commonwealth. And then you had this huge process of transformation during the late 40s and then the 50s and the early 60s, when all these different British colonies, and let's remember the empire didn't just consist of colonies, there were mandate territories, there were formerly independent countries which were actually so dependent that they were what we call part of the informal empire.
Today, the Commonwealth is particularly beneficial for its smaller members. There are 33 small state members distributed across the globe, from Malta and Cyprus to Fiji and Tuvalu. Countries with small populations and weak economies can benefit from organizational resources and diplomatic access that would otherwise be far beyond their reach.
And you now had these vastly different countries which shared one thing, which was the link to the UK, which still were in this very loose organization, but which included completely different political systems. God knows they were not all democracies, and many of them didn't even have very good human rights records. So this idea that they share so many values is, in my view, very simplistic and somewhat a rose-tinted view of the Commonwealth and the history of the empire. It's important to remember that the Commonwealth was created as a post-colonial club, and it did preserve a link with the former imperialist power.
From 1947 to 1949, the modern Commonwealth emerged with the inclusion of its first Asian members, India, Pakistan, and Ceylon, now Sri Lanka. As the British Empire declined, the number of Commonwealth members grew. During their time in office from 1951 to 1964, conservative governments viewed the Commonwealth as a kind of buffer against the full repercussions of imperial collapse.
In 1948, the so-called British Nationality Act was passed, and that was a law which established a citizenship, which made the citizens of the Commonwealth citizens of the UK or the colonies. And it meant that they could migrate to the United Kingdom freely. And there was very significant migration from some parts of the former empire and the Commonwealth in the late 40s and throughout the 1950s. The migration of the 50s really changed the fabric of British society, and we see the consequences. The United Kingdom we know today, we wouldn't have had without that history of empire and Commonwealth. There is this politician, the Labour politician David Lammy, who is a very prominent Labour politician, and he once held a speech in Parliament about migration.
The Windrush story begins in the 17th century, when British slave traders stole 12 million Africans from their homes, took them to the Caribbean, sold them into slavery to work on plantations. The wealth of this country was built on the backs of the Windrush generation's ancestors. We are here today because you were there. My ancestors were British subjects, but they were not British subjects because they came to Britain. They were British subjects because Britain came to them, took them across the Atlantic, colonized them, sold them into slavery, profited from their labor, and made them British subjects.
Prince Philip, representing the Queen of England, was a warmly welcomed guest as the British colony of Tanganyika prepared to begin a new chapter in its history by declaring independence.
And then in 1971, another law was passed, which basically meant that whether or not you were a Commonwealth citizen made no difference to your rights to come to the United Kingdom. Especially in the 1950s, there was a lot of migration, especially from the Caribbean. And at the time, that was desired because there were shortages of workers. They needed people to staff, for example, the NHS, the National Health Service. So that was welcome, but it also produced a counter movement in the United Kingdom. There were people who simply didn't like migrants, especially black migrants. And the result of this was that there were laws passed in the early 60s and then in the early 70s, which severely limited the right of Commonwealth citizens to come to the United Kingdom.
The 1960s also dashed the hopes of those who believed Britain could build a British world system, a third force alongside the American and Soviet superpowers. During the Cold War, the Commonwealth resisted easy alignment. India increasingly leaned towards the Soviet Union. Tanzania pursued its own socialist path. From 1954, the United States built its own alliance with Pakistan, reducing London's influence in the region. The Commonwealth, which did not fit neatly into Cold War bloc thinking, was viewed with suspicion by Washington.
And in 1965, there was another turning point with the creation of the Commonwealth Secretariat, which gave the whole organization a more formal footing and a more organized way of dealing with one another. In the 1970s and 1980s, many Commonwealth countries were fiercely opposed to apartheid in South Africa.
Commonwealth leaders meet in London. An important issue was South Africa's policy of separation. The controversial question of whether South Africa should remain in the Commonwealth despite this policy was not resolved.
South Africa was the wealthiest and most powerful country south of the Sahara, and the most difficult test of the Commonwealth's stated values. It served as a model of white supremacy in settler societies. While London initially sought to keep South Africa within the Commonwealth, pressure from the new African member states forced the apartheid regime to withdraw in 1961.
Interesting is that in the 1970s and 80s, the Commonwealth had a bit of a radical history in the sense that many Commonwealth members were very engaged in questions of racial discrimination and especially apartheid in South Africa. The majority of Commonwealth countries was obviously opposed to apartheid, and they used their meetings to talk about it and to try to mobilize against it. So you have former colonies which use this post-colonial club to promote policies which are actually fiercely anti-colonialist and sometimes left-wing, and also which are fiercely opposed to racial segregation. This idea that being in the Commonwealth will help to preserve human rights or improve human rights, I'm a bit doubtful that it has that kind of relevance. An issue like climate change is, of course, highly relevant to many Commonwealth countries, and the fact that they meet and talk regularly, for them to put that on their agenda is an important thing, which it gives the whole question of climate change prominence and visibility. I think the role of the Commonwealth in promoting things like the fight against climate change or the global improvement of human rights is quite limited.
After Britain voted to leave the European Union in 2016, some politicians promoted the idea of using the Commonwealth as the foundation of a new global Britain, a neo-imperial concept that quickly proved to be an illusion. By the time of Brexit, the Commonwealth accounted for only around 9% of Britain's external trade, compared to 43% within the EU. Moreover, the majority of that Commonwealth trade was concentrated in just 5 bilateral relationships with India, Canada, Australia, Singapore, and South Africa. And those relationships are governed by individual trade agreements, not by Commonwealth membership. The organization offers no common trade framework that Britain could simply activate post-Brexit.
After Britain left the EU, you had this idea of a global Britain foreign policy. So the idea that Britain would now look beyond the small provincial Europe and look at the world, and that this fitted well with Britain's history, the history of a globalist power, the history of a free trading nation. That's interesting because all of this is true, but it's obviously just half of the story, because those global connections, they arose from the empire. So the empire is always there, but it's never mentioned.
The major Commonwealth economies have shown little appetite for serving as a replacement for the EU. Many, including Australia, Canada, and India, increasingly see China as their primary trading partner for the future. There is also a fundamental contradiction at the heart of the Brexit Commonwealth vision. What Commonwealth states would most desire in exchange for deeper ties, easier immigration to the United Kingdom, is precisely what Brexit made more difficult to offer.
I think the first challenge the Commonwealth is facing in the 21st century is relevance. I don't think it will stop to exist, but there are those who say that people won't leave it because it's not important enough to leave it. The question is, how much can it still matter in a completely changed world compared to what it was at its inception?
In the 21st century, belief in shared values within the Commonwealth is slowly eroding. Long-standing tensions between members, such as India and Pakistan, continue to undermine any sense of collective purpose. This was starkly illustrated when 9 Commonwealth members abstained from the UN vote to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Given its loose and voluntary structure, the Commonwealth can offer only symbolic support in such moments. And yet, perhaps, that has always been the point. One of the reasons Brexit could happen was the internalized belief, deeply embedded in parts of British culture, that Britain, and by extension the Commonwealth, remains a global power. The Commonwealth has, to a certain extent, allowed the British to avoid confronting a profoundly changed world.